about Thursday night heading into Friday morning is going to shift to the north. It is going to shift to coastal areas of Georgia and South Carolina. And we call these streamlines, all these little white little dashes you see here. Those are indications of the wind direction and the wind speed. All of this wind that's going to be moving still at an incredible force is going to be pushing all of this water onshore. Right now on the right side of your screen, we actually have a live shot. This is from Punta Gorda, Florida. You can see, look at the American flag blowing around in the background there. It's at half staff. I'm going closer to the camera just simply so I can see what's going on here. You can see that flag is holding on for dear life there. Those trees are blowing around. It is just incredible to see these images. That's from Bret Adair. All right, so now wind gusts. This is right now looking elsewhere. Key West still has 32-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Miami is even still dealing with very stormy weather, even though they were probably going to be one of the areas to get the lesser impact compared to the Florida Panhandle. 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Orlando, 39-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Now, I was telling you that the focus starting Friday morning is really going to start shifting to the north. Here's why. We have storm surge warnings in effect for northeastern Florida, for Georgia, coastal areas, also South Carolina. Storm surge warning is in effect there. And then, of course, Ian, we still have those storm surge warnings in effect for the west coast of Florida.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to get back to some of those reports. We talked about what was ongoing in Fort Myers Beach. Unfortunately, distress calls, people calling for rescues because of the awful storm surge flooding that's occurring there. We do have this update from Fort Myers. It looks like that updated to 4 feet. This has been an unreliable sensor. We think we're having some issues because of what's related to this very high surge. Naples stopped reporting at 6.2 feet, which was a record when it stopped reporting. That bested the old surge, which was from Irma, which cut in somewhere about there. So Fort Myers up to 4 feet. We're not sure about the reliability of that, but I want to show you that because that's in Fort Myers as you move up the Caloosahatchee River a little bit. Fort Myers Beach is down here, and what we talked about with Fort Myers Beach is that it has an elevation of just 3 feet. So farther up the river, we're seeing the surge to 4 feet. We know that that number is good enough to inundate all of Fort Myers Beach, and that is why this is such a life-threatening situation. And sadly, we got these reports of people calling for rescue, but unfortunately, we talked about that with major hurricane conditions ongoing, Charlotte and Lee counties shut down rescue operations a couple hours back. So this is a very heartbreaking scenario ongoing. This is Fort Myers Beach, and that's what I was just showing you. It's a barrier island, well displaced from Fort Myers proper. There's been an evacuation order here for about 24 to 36 hours because as this surge builds up, you were just seeing that component of onshore flow in the previous graphic. This water is now getting pushed directly into the shoreline. It's going up and over this entire barrier island. It's just, as I mentioned, 3 feet in elevation. The surge, we know, before that sensor was failing, was at least 4 feet. So that water is going directly up and over and finding its way into mainland southwest Florida. So that's what is so problematic about what's ongoing right now in Fort Myers Beach. And Seth, if you can, let's pull this out, give people some perspective about where we're expecting the worst of this storm surge overall. When we're talking in a broader sense, there's the Caloosahatchee River. Then we look farther off to the north and east where we saw the actual landfall taking place. That was farther over here, Cayo Costa. That's where the landfall occurred. You've got the center, which is moving this way. You've got water being pushed up into Charlotte Harbor. You've got water being pushed up into the Caloosahatchee River. All the while, that center is still here. The backside of this storm, this entire area, that entire half of the storm, the southeastern quadrant as well as the southwestern quadrant, you've got a significant onshore component to this wind. That water is still going to be piling up. And we should also point out, Fort Myers doesn't even have their high tide cycle until 6:45. So we're, what, 3 hours out until high tide even occurs in Fort Myers. And we've got these surge levels rising considerably. Look at that in Punta Gorda. Kelly just reported a few minutes ago they had a gust there that was approaching 125 miles per hour. Think about the direction of that wind gust. We've had sustained hurricane force winds, but when you think about the direction of gusts up to 125 miles per hour, that's a lot of force that's pushing the water into Charlotte Harbor and into all these other adjacent waters. That's what's generating the storm surge. And this is just getting started, unfortunately. We're seeing these these water levels rising. We've got a ways to go. It'll be through the evening and into the overnight hours tonight. The eventual storm track takes it into central Florida. We talk about all the problems with that, these hurricane gusts that will be occurring and knocking out power up into the I-4 corridor. But all the while, when you have this broad circulation with tropical storm force winds, which correct me the latest on this, I believe the tropical storm force winds, I'll check this bulletin, I think it's about 175 miles or so as this has been expanding in size. So yeah, you think about the entire Florida peninsula covered by those tropical storm force winds, that's going to be a very problem. What's the latest in? Okay, in Fort Myers, the storm surge there, the water rise at least, measured at 4.3 feet. So that's about 1.5 feet up over Fort Myers Beach, Kelly.
Okay, and we also want to move over now to Brett Adair. We're on the phone with him. He's got a live shot you're seeing here. This is live. This is in Punta Gorda. Brett, how are conditions there? What are you hearing?
All kinds of power flashes, electrical shorting. It sounds like it's either a substation that we've been kind of around, but we're also hearing, as you can see, a lot of tree debris and pieces of roofs coming off, the wooden roof structures. We've seen several of those fly by. But we went out to Charlotte Harbor here just a little bit ago, or near the harbor here at Punta Gorda. We wanted to check the water level. The water level at this point here is still low, so we're not getting storm surge just yet. It does look like, however, that is beginning to turn around in terms of the wind, so we're starting to see water levels rise, and this area is just so surge prone, so we're very concerned about that. We got several power explosions going in front of us right now, right there beyond the railroad crossing. I don't know what that is, but that's kind of what we've been dealing with here for the last hour and a half. It really picked up extremely fast. It went from mid-range type tropical storm force winds to full-blown Category 2-ish hurricane-type winds with gusts even higher, as you mentioned a little bit ago.
Brett, we do have this breaking into Fox Weather right now. We do have a new record storm surge in Fort Myers, Florida. 4.3 feet is being reported right now when the old record was just 3.36 feet. That was back during Hurricane Gabrielle back in 2001. But absolutely incredible images to be seeing there for you, Brett. We really hope you are staying safe. You did mention that the worst of the storm surge is not there yet. That's why you can see the road not covered in water, but it certainly is covered in all sorts of flying debris there.
Right, that is absolutely happening, which we're making our way pretty well close to some buildings that are keeping us sheltered. Now, we're dealing with some wind, don't get me wrong, but we're able to get these shots out. And many of the streets in Punta Gorda look like this. You've got the palm fronds, you've got the coconuts here in the street, then just several pieces of debris from either, again, roofs, fences, that type of thing. And then we've also seen power poles that have been down. So as we continue to go through the afternoon, we're waiting to get into the eye here. It looks like we're about to enter that eye, so maybe we can get some drone footage inside just to see how the damage really is here shortly. But we're going to be watching now those water levels, because as we get on the other side of the storm and the winds change, we're going to be watching the tide cycle change here as well.
Brett, what is next for you? Are you planning on moving to a different location? Are you planning on hunkering down?
Well, honestly, it's going to depend on availability to get out once the storm has really gotten through here, because Punta Gorda is really just now getting through one piece of the storm. Once we go into the eye, which we may just barely be inside of, we've still got to deal with at least one section of the eye wall as the winds change. So this is the damage from the first part of the storm. It really depends on what things look like afterwards. We may be a bit immobile, but we do have a concrete reinforced shelter here that we do have access to. Our vehicle has access to. So as the water levels begin to rise here soon, we do have a safe spot to be in.
So conditions are going to be improving for you here soon, since you're getting into the eye. Now, we can clearly see on the road there's a lot of debris. Your next move, I know you're planning on driving there. What is in your way? What are you going to have to be driving through in order to get there? I mean, there were a lot of branches around. What kind of car are you driving?
Well, I'm in a high-profile vehicle, a Suburban that's a 4x4, and it's a little bit elevated off the roadway. So to come into these systems, you have to be prepared with the proper sports utility vehicle and supplies. So we can get some of this out of the way if things calm down. Not a lot of flooding. You can see that there's definitely some ponding there on the roadway, but that's only a couple inches deep. So we should be good to go in terms of that as long as things don't get too much worse. But again, we're seeing the skies begin to lighten up as that ragged eye, begins to approach our area now.
Conditions improve, a lot of people may think it's over, and that is not the case. $1 million question here. Have you been seeing a lot of people out and about and driving around, or is it more of a ghost town?
It's definitely more of a ghost town. You've got a couple of officials that are out and people covering the storm here for various entities, but it looks like a lot of the residents took this seriously. And to be honest with you, up until 5 minutes ago, we had power here, which is amazing with some of the gusts that we've taken. So back in 2004, when Hurricane Charlie moved through this area, there's been some different building codes that have been established and some changes. And you can tell that thus far, a lot of the structures are holding up very well, as well as the infrastructure.
I cannot tell you how happy that makes me in order to hear that it is incredibly quiet and people are taking this very seriously. Do you have any advice for people that are in Punta Gorda right now?
Well, again, we're definitely staying out here to try and keep this covered for you. If you are sheltered in place and in your home, just stay there. Again, have your flood plan ready. Hopefully you have an area that you can go into an elevated surface if we do end up getting the storm surge that is expected here, because it's going to spread off of the Charlotte Harbor, and, it'll go probably a couple of miles because that onshore flow is going to begin to kick in. All that water that went out has to come back in.
That's right. All right, Brett Adair, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be checking in with you throughout the day. Please stay safe out there.
Thanks, guys.
Katie, over to you.
All right, guys, I want to talk a lot about the storm surge right now. One thing that you need to know, with that eye wall being north of Fort Myers, it's really the worst case scenario for Fort Myers, okay? And a lot of this wind flow is really going to be pushing a lot of this moisture in, and we've already seen a great deal of rain. In fact, record-breaking storm surge for Fort Myers at 4.3 feet. Seth, that's right, correct? That's the last number we've gotten, 4.3 feet. Record-breaking storm surge for Fort Myers. So you can see it's only going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm taking a look right now, and what we're seeing is a lot of this rain coming in. You've seen the videos on social media. We're showing it to you on Fox Weather. What you see is what you get, okay? This hurricane made landfall at 3:05 p.m. and it has been destructive up to that point. It will continue to be destructive. Again, worst case scenario for Fort Myers. Right now, as Ian mentioned earlier, it's looking like, some of these areas like Naples stopped recording around 6.2 feet, but we know that this number will grow as far as the storm surge goes, and this is something we're really gonna have to keep an eye on. Again, though, record-breaking storm surge right now in Fort Myers at 4.3 feet. High and low tides, 6:45 for today, tomorrow, 12:06 a.m. High tide Thursday, 5:48 a.m. Low tide, 1:35 p.m. Just to give you an idea of what you can expect as far as the tides go, that has a huge play within how much moisture will make its way onto land and cause a lot of problems, okay? Peak storm surge, you could see 4 to 6 feet between Spring Hill and Tampa, but let's focus on this. Right here between Punta Gorda all the way down to Bonita Springs, 12 to 18 feet of storm surge expected. And I'll tell you this much too, I've seen video of Bonita Springs, a lot of this going out there on Twitter. Thank you, by the way, for sending that to Fox Weather. But what we're seeing is a lot of damage already. So with this particular storm surge on the way and even already happening, we have storm surge warnings from Cedar Key down to Key West, and there's no shock there. It'll be a long time before we see any of this change. We've even got warnings here on the east side too, up the coast, by the way, and that'll be a bit of an issue into next week. So storm surge is just a really, really deadly thing in a storm of this size. You could see a Category 4 hurricane right here creating these wave heights at 6 to about 12 feet. And so that's where you're going to see that damage continue. Again, you can see as it flows in with the winds and the way that this storm is moving, the wave heights could potentially only grow. As we look at Venice, the current gust, 79 miles an hour, all right? And it looks like from where we were 5 hours ago. It's enhanced a bit. We were between 50 to 70, but now, again, 79 miles an hour, the current gust in Venice, Florida. So not a good situation at all in Venice. We're going to continue to see those gusts rise, and that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. As we look at the Fox model does an excellent job of showing you exactly what's happening. This will be by about 6 o'clock. We're going to continue to see the storm turning in. Cedar Key and Tampa is going to continue to take the worst of it, along with Fort Myers up toward Jacksonville, Orlando. You all will start to see flash flooding. In fact, Ian, there is an extreme, the highest risk you can be under, the extreme risk for flash flooding in the next few days for Orlando. Parking decks are actually opening up so that people can move their cars to safety. We know right now in some spots with this storm surge, people's homes are underwater up to the roofs. We're nowhere near done yet. We won't be able to take a deep breath for a long time.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, that inland flooding is just the next chapter in this already very devastating storm. We told you about that sensor in Naples, the water level sensor, the water rise, went offline over 6 feet. Significant surge, a record surge that occurred in Naples. We're just reading this report into Fox Weather. It's on an article on foxweather.com. You can go there and get all the details on this. But the Naples Fire Rescue Department had flooding at their fire station, and it sounds like there was a smoking fire truck that had to be pushed outside. So it's just an indication here that we talked about how it's not safe for first responders in some of these places, Collier County, Charlotte, and Lee counties. We got these rescue calls. The first responders are dealing with a lot of the same problems from this major hurricane. So just an indication of that in Naples. We know, Ian, it made landfall about an hour ago now. We do want to bring in Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross. And Brian, this is a top 5 storm now when we're talking about major hurricane landfalls in Florida. The comparison to Charlie, with the track at least, but this storm is so much bigger than Charlie.
Yeah, it's a completely different hurricane, Ian, than Charlie. I mean, Charlie was fierce, and in the Charlotte Harbor area in Punta Gorda and up that waterway, I mean, it was a mega hurricane, but it was like a tornado. It was essentially a tornado that went through there. This is a real hurricane. This is a big, lumbering, powerful hurricane that's moving a lot of Gulf water. And as you've been talking about, it's moving it to the coast. And, you know, the records that we're going to set all kinds of records here for storm surge because they haven't had many hurricanes on the West Coast since those storm surge or water level sensors have been in place in Fort Myers and Naples going back to the mid-60s. So, you know, if you go back to 1960 to Hurricane Donna in 1944, the great hurricane that went up through there. And the one record for Fort Myers is 1873, obviously way before there were sensors. So this is definitely the modern hurricane now of record in Southwest Florida. All right, so here you see it, and there you see it moving ashore. Now, this is unfortunately really bad news for Lee County and Fort Myers because you can clearly see that the center is to the north. Now, that doesn't mean that up here, this is Charlotte Harbor right in here. That doesn't mean that that's going to be a picnic up there. But the problem is that in the Fort Myers area, it's going to push the water up the river because the river kind of runs west to east. Once that wind is coming from the west, then the water coming out of the Gulf goes up the river. And a lot of people live along that river. Downtown Fort Myers is on the south side of that river. And not to mention Cape Coral and, you know, the populated areas are along that river. So this is going to be a significant issue. Looking close up on it here, we can see it. There's Cayo Costa, the little island there. It's a state park island that where the center, more or less, of Ian made landfall. And you can clearly see that this bottom side of the eye wall is like this, and the Caloosahatchee River comes kind of up like that. So once the wind is coming from this direction, it's pushing water up that river from the Gulf, and it can go 10 miles inland up that river. Just a lot of folks in Fort Myers are near that waterway. All right, let's take a look at the winds right now, and you've probably heard about the 125-mile-an-hour gusts in Punta Gorda here. The latest reading was gusting to 123, so it's still a fierce windstorm going on in Punta Gorda, although it looks like now, so Punta Gorda is you see this little kind of area of land sticking out there into Charlotte Harbor. This is Charlotte Harbor here. So that's Punta Gorda right there. So if they're still getting ones, and the airport is kind of to the west. It's not the I-75, but it's to the west east of Punta Gorda. So they must be very close to getting in the eye there now. I imagine we'll see those winds go down. There you see the radar, and the main point of this is that the super heavy rain is to the north, and it's kind of expanding to the north as the system is going this way. This is expanding to the north. So throughout this system's life, I think, this is where the rain is going to be, north and east of the center. And this is going to be important for central Florida as we look ahead, because if you think of this as the track of the system, like this, let's say, it could be a little farther south, whatever, but if the worst of the rain is in here, like this, look, that encompasses our major cities, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville. And that is the expectation of what's going to happen. And here on the rain, this is a new rain forecast from the Weather Prediction Center. I want you to look at that area there from Orlando toward Daytona Beach. And that's 18 to 24 inches in widespread areas, which we would expect some isolated spots, maybe 30 inches in this area. So this is an extreme, and they're calling it extreme as well, a flash flooding threat all over central and North Florida. In terms of the models, I just showed you that, say that it's right down the middle of the cone of the models. We don't expect anything else from that. So inland goes the storm, and what we have here are the hurricane force gusts in the orange here, and that's hurricane force gusts. And you notice they extend almost all the way across the street. This storm has grown so large, and we're talking about midnight tonight now, and just coming to Orlando, those are the hurricane force sustained. Notice they're shrinking because the overall storm will be weakening, but expanding. And the yellow, that's tropical storm force winds. Look at that. This is the entire peninsula except for Miami-Dade and Broward County. Now, let's move forward in time for 6 hours. Now it's 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Now the hurricane force gusts are all of metropolitan Orlando down to Melbourne, the Space Coast, and essentially we don't have hurricane force winds. Let's just ignore that. But we're talking about sustained winds of 60, 70 miles per hour, gusts up to 80, 90 miles per hour, something like that. So damaging winds on top of that incredible rain that we just talked about in the 2-foot range in that same area. So we expect incredibly difficult conditions here in Central Florida tomorrow. And by the way, some counties are already doing this, and maybe more that I haven't heard of is they're opening shelters and all that kind of thing. Normally you don't do that for a windstorm, but they're so worried about the flooding that they want people to have safe places to go, and also they want electricity dependent people and people that, if the power goes out for an extended period of time are going to have a problem. So we all expect all of that in the whole Central Florida area, millions and millions of people, and then it moves north, and now we have the storm driving the water into Jacksonville, into Charleston, and this is going to start on Thursday. So long, long way to go here. Guys, back to you.
Certainly is, Brian. Thank you for the report. And as you were briefing us on the latest with Hurricane Ian, we got a new update in on power outages in Florida. Now over 1 million, about 1,030,000 customers in the Sunshine State without power. Look at this brand new video just into Fox Weather. This is from Vanderbilt Beach. That's about 9 miles north of Naples. It's another barrier island, beautiful beach area. That's water creeping up to the first hotel, the first floor of the hotel. The reporter that shot this video said the folks in there feel like they're in Titanic. It's a similar picture when you have water rushing up a stairwell like this. It's dramatic, but it shows you exactly what's going on with surge. And not only that, that's flowing water. And you can see clearly yet another barrier island that has been completely overcome with the storm surge related to Hurricane Ian. All right, we're going to go down to Pinellas County now. That's where we find Fox Weather's Max Gordon live in St. Pete. Max, how are you holding up out there?
Hey, we're doing good. We actually shifted positions over the last hour or so. We were on the edges of Tampa Bay. and we were noticing a phenomenon known as reverse storm surge. It's essentially when the wind at the very northern edge of the hurricane pushes the water out of the bay, and then it'll eventually come rushing back in. So we were seeing those very dramatic images of the water essentially, emptied out there of the bay. But we were noticing it start to come back in pretty rapidly. So we wanted to get out of there in time, make sure that our crew is safe. Right now we are on a little bit of higher ground, but we are next to this lake here. We were broadcasting from this position yesterday, and the water level here was much, much lower yesterday. We can see the water begin to rise right now. And so we'll definitely be keeping tabs on that as this storm progresses, both from the runoff that we're experiencing here and also just from the storm surge. All of these lakes here, or many of them rather, are connected to the bay, connected to the ocean. So many lakes will be experiencing some storm surge because they're connected by canals. Now, of course, a big concern for a lot of people here is going to be the amount of rainfall that we'll receive in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, up to 2 feet of rainfall once this storm has moved through. So flooding is going to be a massive concern. And then there's also going to be the issue of power outages. Several thousand people currently without power now in Pinellas County, though we are expecting that number to rise as the storm moves into the area and we really get those gustier winds. We know that Governor DeSantis told us in a press conference earlier today that around 40,000 linemen and utility workers are here in the state ready to respond and restore power when need be. But those linemen and utility workers, they're not going to be able to go up in those bucket trucks until the wind calms down. We talked to Duke Energy yesterday, a utility provider here, and they said their workers can't go up in winds greater than 35 miles per hour. So those winds are going to be gusting for, at least the next day or so. So a lot of people are going to have to just do without power for the time being. Now, as far as the response is concerned from the state, around 5,000 Florida National Guardsmen are here ready to respond, and 2,000 guardsmen from elsewhere in the country are also going to be helping out. Governor Ron DeSantis says that 26 states have offered their help, and they're also getting help from the federal government as well. So we'll continue to keep tabs on this storm as it moves up into the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, and we'll keep all y'all updated as this storm progresses. Ian, I'm going to toss it back to you.
Fox Weather's Max Gordon, thank you very much. And yeah, as Max was telling us, storm surge is a very nuanced thing. You had that reverse storm surge that occurred in the Bay earlier in the day, but now that center is off to Max's south and east, and there is a significant easterly component in Tampa Bay that's pushing a lot of water into the eastern-facing shores of Pinellas County, which there are many. So yeah, certainly makes sense that he saw a bit of water rise ongoing there. Want to look back at the landfall, which occurred now just a little bit more than an hour ago at 3:05. That was near Cayo Costa, which is almost exactly, well, really exactly where Charley made landfall back in 2004. Max winds at 150 miles per hour. And as we talked about with Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross, a much more massive storm when we're talking about the overall wind field than Hurricane Charley. Its minimum central pressure at landfall, that was 940 millibars. So that's where we stand with the official landfall that occurred just about an hour ago. So Seth, if you can, go ahead and switch that over for me. We'll talk about the new update from the National Hurricane Center. As we mentioned, landfall was a little bit more than an hour ago. This is now the 4 o'clock update. The winds have come down ever so slightly, still a Category 4 storm. You expect the weakening trend, but those winds are still at 145 miles per hour. We had that gust that was recorded in Punta Gorda, 125. Its motion, that was unchanged, moving north-northeast at 9 miles per hour. And this is the problem. This is still a very powerful storm that has the entire peninsula that it needs to make its way over. And with those gusts, very impressive that we're still recording, these power outage numbers will be going up significantly. We're already up into 7 figures now, more than 1 million customers without power, 1 million households. Look at some of these storm reports now. This was from the social media post. We talked about this storm surge up to the first floor roofs in Fort Myers Beach. There are some people on the island that were requesting rescue. This is a dangerous scenario that's unfolding. Up in Port Charlotte, Charlotte Bay, we've seen some surge, but Fort Myers specifically, that's where we've seen the worst of this. Look at that gust in Punta Gorda, 145. Let's go back out to Fox Weather's Robert Ray. He's live in Fort Myers. Robert?
Yeah, Ian, it get persistent. Tropical storm and a hurricane wind gusts here in Fort Myers downtown. And you talked about the beach, where Fort Myers Beach is. That's where we started our day there this morning. And gosh, sure enough, the second we realized that surge was beginning to come in, we got out of there. We went over the bridge and came here. But now, getting that dirty side of the storm as debris is flying around from trees. There is some rooftops, shingles that I'm looking at in the distance, and a giant oak tree that is just literally getting torn apart by this wind field here. And you look down, all the way down this street, 3-4 blocks, I can see with my naked eye the water getting pushed up and all around swirling from the bay. And so the surge, a record surge here, over 4 feet here in Fort Myers so far. Nothing like down at the beach, but my goodness, we just haven't been able to move around too much in the past few hours because of these persistent winds. Needed to keep our equipment underneath this parking garage, but eventually I'm gonna go and I wanna see what's happening down there in the bay. I can hear it. It sounds like it's pushing. I can see the water just sort of going up. It looks like sand in the air, but it's actually water. So I'm curious to see that situation. Meanwhile, over 1 million reported power outages in Florida right now. That's new numbers that we just received. And here we go again with another wind gust that is coming through. And I feel for so many people in this region, Naples to the south, just the images out of there are devastating. The images on the shorelines, devastating. What this is going to do to the economy here, the people that have retired here, people that have moved from around the world and the country here from the start of the pandemic. There are so many things ahead of us in the coming days, but right now the nightmare persists and continues, Ian, here as we're still feeling these winds and these rains. And in the past hour or so, definitely felt the hardest wind gusts that we've experienced thus far. Ian?
Robert, where exactly are you in Fort Myers? We know Fort Myers downtown is on the southern shores of the Caloosahatchee River. You get this lull right now, but we've talked about how broad this storm is, so you still have a long way to go. That water is going to get pushed up the river, so all those communities, you mentioned Cape Coral too. Where will you be staged as we move through the next several hours as that water continues to rise?
Well, our hotel is just to the north of here. We hope that it's going to be okay. If not, we will find high ground somewhere in a garage like this. This garage is 4 stories. We may have to hunker down inside. I don't know. It is moment to moment. And look at this. As part of that oak tree comes right by. It is fluid, moment to moment. The decisions are moment to moment, though, we have a plan, but sometimes we can't activate the plan until the forces of nature tell us to. I hope our hotel's not flooded out, but honestly, who cares? I hope these people's neighborhoods and these businesses are not flooded out more than anything. We have vehicles we can sleep in. Imagine if you're going to lose what you got, your livelihoods, your homes, and what you do. And my God, here we go again. These wind gusts are just outrageous. And you asked where I am. I'm at 2nd Street. Hang on 1 second. I want to give you an exact location. 2nd and Jackson Street in Fort Myers. It's my exact location, Ian.
Wow. I'm taking a look at that right now, Robert, and I hate to say it, it was kind of right on cue. I'm looking at the latest radar imagery. You're in this little lull as you're in kind of an eroded portion of the southeastern eye wall, but immediately to your south, which is going to be moving through as we head through the next matter of minutes and then over the next couple hours, you still have that whole real southern half of this storm to move on through. So yes, the wind is changing direction, and it's even a much more problematic wind direction. All this in a lull, and we're seeing trees flying by you.
So basically, the dirty side is still making its way through here, and we have 2-3 hours left of this. Is that in a nutshell?
Certainly, yeah. Parts of that eye wall, you caught a lot of the core that came on through when you were on the east side of the eye wall. Some of that has eroded a bit with a little bit of dry air, but there is still a healthy portion of the southern side of this circulation that's going to be pivoting over you. This is as we move through the short term. You don't have a whole lot of time there before it looks like it's going to start to pour on you heavily once again, and it's those rain bands. There you go. Okay, yeah, it's those bands that contain some of those big wind gusts there.
Yeah, I mean, I can lean into that. At the initial gust, you can lean into that and literally not get pushed. You know, I mean, it's amazing. It's almost like you're skiing downhill in a sense. If I were to turn around, I'd probably go flying.
One thing to think about with this also is there are a lot of trees around that are still standing, but the longer you deal with those winds, the weaker and weaker those trees get. So then when you get the dirty side of the storm that we were just telling you about, it's not going to take quite as much of a wind to knock all those already weakened trees down, which means we're going to see significantly more debris being blown around.
Yeah, you can also see in that southwest, we just had the radar up on the right side of the screen, that southwestern flank, which is out over the open waters of the Gulf still, you could see that really blowing up over the last 30 minutes or so, some strong thunderstorms. Those are rotating around. We're going to have to watch to see if those can maintain their intensity, as those would be pivoting around the inner core a little bit closer to you, Robert. But it does look like those wind gusts are still painfully persistent, even if the rain's not there right now.
They are a little lull here, but you know, once you let your guard down, it comes again. You can't do it. My saying out here today has been head on a swivel, always doing this, because you just don't know where something's going to come from. Very dangerous.
That's the correct mantra. We appreciate the report very much, Robert. Stay safe as we move on through the next several hours. We'll be checking back in with you.
Thanks. Appreciate all the info, too.
All right, so right now we do want to be joined by former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate. Could you please give us an update on everything that's going on?
Well, as you're hearing, the storm's hitting, and the state, Governor DeSantis, and everybody from the local official, state, and FEMA are preparing and have teams ready to go. But as you're seeing, this storm is not going to clear this area quickly, and it's still a hurricane moving inland, and we're expecting extreme rainfall across central Florida. Those winds are going to knock more trees down. The power outages are going to go up. So the big thing right now for people that are in this area, if you're somewhere safe, stay inside.
And Craig, you're in Gainesville. We're talking about this landfall that occurred a little bit better than an hour ago now in southwest Florida, but this is a storm that's going to impact every place in between where landfall occurred and where you're at.
Yeah, if you go back and you look at this track, it's going to cross the state as a hurricane. It may weaken a little bit and as it gets closer to the coast, but it's going to go into the Atlantic, and we're going to start seeing impacts all the way up into Jacksonville. We already have extreme rainfall risk across much of the peninsula, so there's not too much of peninsular Florida that's not seeing impacts. I mean, yesterday we had storm surge in the Florida Keys, tornadoes across southeast Florida, and now this storm as it's moving up through the center of the state.
One question I did want to ask, when the worst of the storm is over and people start turning on their generators, carbon monoxide poisoning is one of the biggest killers in post-storm. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, this is why we tell people, you know, when the storm passes, make sure you're okay, check on your neighbors, and sit tight. Because more people have died in Florida after the hurricanes from accidents, carbon monoxide poisoning. So if you got a generator, don't put it in your carport, don't run it inside, keep it a safe distance from your home. Make sure you turn it off when you're refueling, because the rescuers and emergency services are going to be so busy, you don't want to add to that. But the key thing on a generator is the deadly part of that is the carbon monoxide. Do not put it in your carport, do not put it in your garage, certainly don't put it in your home. Make sure it is as far away from your house as your extension cord will reach. And again, be careful. Falls, traffic crashes, electrocutions, heart attacks will cause a lot of loss of life if people are getting out too quickly and not taking care of themselves.
Craig, I do want to ask you about the disaster response elements of this, because this is as large-scale a disaster really as there can be when we're talking about natural disasters. So many elements to this from some of the things you talked about yesterday. We had the tornadoes, we have storm surge, we have freshwater flooding inland from all this heavy rain and those hurricane conditions that will spread from coast to coast in Florida. So what's it like? We've seen all the steps that the state government, the federal government has taken in response to this storm, but we're at the point where, unfortunately, the storm will do what it's going to do. What's the steps moving forward as this exits?
Well, this is the chess match. They've been sitting up in Tallahassee at the state EOC, mapping out the areas that are going to get hit. They're making assignments for the search and rescue teams. But as you pointed out, they had to wait to see what exactly the storm was doing. And they'll start moving, and they will not wait for the sun to shine. But like you heard from the utilities, kind of hard to get crews out there on the roads until the winds come down where it's safe enough. And the first steps is actually opening up the roads, getting those roads open up, I-75, both north and south, and going across to the East Coast, getting the I-4 corridor back opened up so that the teams can get down to the Fort Myers and Collier County, Naples area to start doing search and rescues. They'll start with the local responders, the state and other non-impacted counties will be sending folks. They've got mutual aid from other states. And so there will be a lot of moving pieces starting later this evening as the winds come down and they can get in the areas while the state's still being hit. And then they'll kind of come up behind the storm as it moves through areas and have a better idea of impacts. But there will be a lot of what we would call triage. The hardest hit counties will get the priority for the resources. Other areas that are being hit but not as severe are going to have to hold on until more help comes because the focus has got to be on life safety and getting to these areas that have been devastated by the storm surge.
Considering the damage that we're looking at right now, how long do you think it'll take to conduct these water rescues?
Well, we've done this before. We did it in Mississippi, supporting the state of Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. A lot of what we would call the primary search will be done in the first couple of days. And then you're going to have to go in and if it's really bad, you're going to be going house by house and going in and doing searches. That's why FEMA's already deployed additional urban search and rescue teams. You have the state search and rescue teams. They're going to be gridding this thing out, meaning they map out, not by street signs, but where the houses are. And they'll go in and do the preliminary search, trying to locate people that are trapped or isolated, that are injured, get to them first. And then they're going to go through and do a thorough search and go house to house in these areas of heavy devastation.
Craig Fugate, former FEMA administrator, we appreciate your insight. Again, the response to this will have to be massive as this is a devastating strike to Florida with major Hurricane Ian. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Kiana, let's send it over to you.
All right, we're going to take a look at those power outages once again. Now that Ian has made landfall, we are really starting to feel the brunt of those gusty winds pushing through. We're starting to even see those power outages with our tracker here expand further off to the north and to the south. At one point, areas off to the north of Fort Myers were under a 50 to 70% chance of those outages being active. Now that's beyond 75%. Actually, to be exact, about a million customers, I should say, are now without power across part of the state of Florida. And really, the bulk of them come out of Lee County, but Charlotte County is right on the hills of Lee with 64%, and beyond that, 63% out towards Sarasota. So there are a number of customers now without power. And as we've been mentioning, we even spoke to Florida's Power and Light Company that told us they will not be restoring power until the storm passes by the area and those winds are down to 30 miles per hour. And we have a long way to get to that. And we will actually continue to see these power outages continue to be more widespread as Ian continues to push further inland and then up the coastline. We have now Georgia as well as South Carolina and the southernmost tip of North Carolina under that chance for having power outages over the next couple of days. But really, the bulk of those widespread power outages are just through central portions of Florida. Orlando now under that widespread category for those power outages. We also see Tampa there as well. Fort Myers already feeling the brunt of that now. And as we take a look at the winds, the gustiest of the winds still pushing through. Fort Myers is still out, so we don't have those wind gusts coming through just yet. So we are getting word that Port Charlotte's even seeing 110 mile per hour gusts Up towards Tampa, the same goes there. Very gusty winds as Ian continues to work its way onshore, and that will not help in the terms of power outages in these areas. As we head through the next couple of days, really into tonight and even into tomorrow, we'll continue with these wind gusts well beyond 60, 70, 80, up to 100 miles per hour. Tampa, you're right in the bullseye, or just to the east of it, with those winds up to 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. That continues to drift off to the north with those winds as Ian pushes back onto the Atlantic shoreline of Florida here. But Jacksonville, you're next. Gainesville, you're next. Orlando, you're just on the cusp of seeing the gustiest of those winds. So those power outages will soon be coming your way. This is what's ahead. We still have a good portion of tonight and into tomorrow where we're dealing with the aftermath of Ian as it continues to barrel on to the north. As we head into tomorrow, we'll continue with those wind gusts. As I mentioned, Georgia, South Carolina, as well as North Carolina have that chance of dealing with power outages into Friday. Kelly?
All right, we are going to go over to Fox Weather's Katie Burns. She is in Orlando, Florida right now. Katie, let's get right to it. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling?
Well, things are definitely intensifying here. I could say that things have progressed in the last hour, especially the wind started picking up. You're getting that gusty wind that you're talking about, but also the rain started coming down pretty hard. So when you look behind me, you're going to see that the leaves on some of these palm trees, they're going to be in the winds here dealing with that. But what's interesting about where we are is we're 130 miles away from where that Hurricane Ian made landfall in just west of Fort Myers. So millions of people fled that area to come over here in Orlando to escape that and look for safety here. But what happened was the hurricane warnings last night shifted and expanded more inland. So people ended up having to ride out the storm here as well. That's what a lot of people are doing in hotels here in Orlando, hunkering down. And some people are a little scared as they make their final preps, grab the last things they need before a lot of things start boarding up and shutting down for the day.
I'm a little scared, but give or take, you pray to the Father above, and I'm sure he'll guide us through. I already have most of my preparation done. I got my house all secured and just last minute water.
That was a lot of people's opinions today. We were talking to people who were at the grocery store before they closed for the afternoon. And what's interesting about being in Orlando is before we start to see the major hurricane impacts here, which is going to happen overnight into early tomorrow morning, it really only takes Category 1 hurricane strength winds to cause damage in a city like this. But we're dealing with a Category 4 hurricane. So nonetheless, it's going to be catastrophic, like the National Hurricane Center has said, on top of the fact that we're probably going to get about 2 feet of rain. Guys?
Thank you, Katie. Great point there. That's what we've been telling you for a week now here on Fox Weather, that these impacts are going to be far-reaching. It does not take Category 4 hurricane winds in order to lose power. Thank you.
Yeah, great point Katie made, too. She's on I-4 in the middle of the state. You've got the landfall, which happened more than 100 miles off to her southwest in southwest Florida. You see those conditions, and now more than 1 million people without power. Let's go back out to Fox Weather's hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross. Brian, just since 4 o'clock, we've got these reports from NHC. Still some gusts to 124 Punta Gorda, 110 at Cape Coral's Fire Department. This is a storm that even though it's on shore, there's a lot of it left to go.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it still over the water too. And you know, when we rate a storm, when they rate a storm, I don't do the rating, but when they rate a storm in terms of the wind speed, almost always the wind speed is over the water and it's in a small part of the storm. So when we have a 155 mile an hour storm, we don't have generally 155 mile an hour winds everywhere, but that can be a differentiating factor in storms. For instance, Hurricane Andrew, the whole eye wall stayed intact when it came ashore. This one was starting to erode a little bit, which is actually, I think, going to benefit Fort Myers a bit. Not that it's not going to be a huge disaster there, but it is going to benefit them just a bit. Okay, let's look at the satellite picture here. This is the wide view. It's still a perfectly developed round hurricane, as you can see on this picture here. And there you can clearly see it is ashore. But also on the southern side of it, you know, and back here, you start to see some slots in here. You see these? This is the dry air that is going to help out the southern part of the state where there's been such tremendous rain and flooding down in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. you know, they're going to have much less than they might have if that dry air hadn't filtered in. Let's look close up what's going on here. And this is a different way. This is looking at the cloud top, so we really can see where the strongest thunderstorms are. And you can see the eye gets less well defined, even though it's still an amazingly symmetric storm. It just gets less well defined because of the friction of the air over the land, and it kind of goes in random directions as the land and the buildings and everything else, and the different kinds of heating over the water and the land affects the speed. But we still have, at the last report, now I'm getting a little, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that we may have an old report at Punta Gorda there because it's still showing from the east. And my thought is with Punta Gorda Airport being here, it would be more likely to be from the south or even switching around there now. Anyway, so let's not look at that, but we see, look at this, near 100 miles an hour, that's at Southwest Regional Airport. It's outside of Fort Myers. So it's a huge donut of damaging winds, and it's going to slowly look at all this part of the storm here is yet to come. So on the radar, the red tells you where the most intense part of the storm is with the heaviest rain. This is actually measuring rain, but the rain brings the strong winds aloft down to the surface, the thunderstorms. And what I said about Fort Myers sort of lucking out in a terrible situation is, as Ian's been describing here on the south side, there's been some erosion from that dry air I was talking about. So it's not, the weather isn't as bad in Fort Myers as it would have been if that dry air hadn't interceded. Now, it remains to be seen if some of this moisture can make its way around or not. So we still have the wind direction to deal with, and the storm surge is more about wind direction at this point, and the wind direction is becoming very unfavorable for what's going to happen with the river there in Fort Myers as the wind is going to come out of the west and push that water to the east. You see the flood warning in effect up here for that red band, and where those red bands are, that's where we're going to expect flooding, and that's not just going to be in Southwest Florida, that's going to be everywhere. And look up here to the north. Again, we see another red band up there. You see coming into Central Florida right now, and it's just going to be one after the other. Another one up here that has the less red in it, but when there's red in those bands like that, that's when you can get tornadoes, especially the ones well outside the storm, and that's where you get the torrential rain. So the track, just remembering that those bands are kind of northeast, kind of the top and to the right of where the center of the hurricane is. So as it moves north, here we are tomorrow morning, so now it's approaching the Orlando area, and these bands are already up into Jacksonville, and they're kind of feeding in like this. And there's going to be kind of a convergence up there because of two weather systems being involved. And this is the forecast for you see where the heavy rain area is, the general area. Look at that. It's all of Central Florida, from Daytona Beach over to the Orlando area. And this core here is 18 to 24 inches of rain, and that's general, and then more on top of that in isolated spots. So like I said earlier, I'm pretty sure we're going to see a number of spots with over 24 inches from this system. But why is it so intense? It's so intense because there's a cold front pushing down from the north, and there's the hurricane moisture coming up from the south. So that combination is going to kind of converge there in Central Florida and north. Models all agree, and there is the extreme flash flood threat tomorrow, again, caused by a combination down here of where the hurricane's coming in, and up here because it's going to be in that convergent zone where the northern systems and the southern systems are going to merge, and then that whole area just inches to the north. So long way to go here, guys.
Yeah, Brian, it's a terrible setup. It's the only time in the last year on Fox Weather that we've seen that red indicating an extreme flash flood threat. That's for today, and it's for tomorrow as well. Speaking of extreme, let's talk about some of the storm reports that we're seeing coming in from Hurricane Ian. This was just into Fox Weather. The Cape Coral Yacht Club, look at this, 135 miles per hour. That was a wind gust with a sustained wind that reached 112. So that is right close to major hurricane force sustained winds, and clearly way up into major hurricane force wind gusts. It's a Category 4 hurricane wind gust. That's now the highest wind report that we've seen in Cape Coral, 135. Redfish Pass, 126. Punta Gorda, we had that gust up to 124. These are incredibly damaging wind gusts, of course, but they're also pushing all that Gulf water into the southwest coastline of Florida, and that's generating this devastating storm surge. We've showed you some of that ongoing in and around Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach with significant storm surge, also down to Naples, which has reported now a record storm surge well up over 6 feet. This storm still maximum sustained winds at 145 miles per hour, a Category 4 storm. That was the latest update at 4 p.m. We'll get some new information coming up at the top of the hour. Here's what's changed over the course of the afternoon. Of course, this was the 1 p.m. advisory from NHC. That was a couple hours before the storm made landfall, had those winds knocking on the door of Category 5 intensity, 155. The pressure at 9:37. Then it moved on shore. This advisory was about an hour after landfall. You expect a weakening trend, but it wasn't all that much weakening. 942 millibars for the central pressure, so that number is rising. That's an indication of a weakening system. But with that friction that Brian was talking about, you lose some of the maximum sustained winds, but they become more gusty, and those gusts will be very damaging. We're going to have to watch for that spreading all the way across the peninsula. This is a threat that's gone all the way back to yesterday afternoon and evening. It was down in South Florida where we had several dozen tornado warnings. We've seen tornado warnings throughout the day today, but this threat now is shifting over to the I-95 corridor, Florida's Atlantic coastline, Daytona Beach down to about Fort Pierce. It includes Orlando. That red shading is a tornado watch that runs until 1 a.m. with these intense bands related to still major Hurricane Ian that have a lot of spin in them. We'll see more of these mostly quick spin-up tornadoes. We had a couple of those confirmed down in Miami-Dade, Broward County yesterday, and we got a tornado report here. It was a brief tornado supported by radar imagery that was right on the Brevard and Osceola County line. So right about here, that's where that brief tornado was reported. That's a threat because although these are very isolated, they contain, of course, much more intense winds. That can be very damaging. So we'll be watching all of these intense bands as they work their way across the peninsula rest of this evening, overnight, and even into the day tomorrow right here on Fox Weather. We'll let you know about those tornado warnings. Kelly?
All right, so we are going to be getting a look at the radar right now just to see what we've got going on with the latest. We are going to go to a live interview now.
you.